Let me describe something, and I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. You met this person, maybe at a party, maybe through a mutual friend, maybe entirely by accident, and within the first hour something shifted. Not butterflies exactly. More like the feeling of recognition. Like your body relaxed into the conversation in a way you didn't even notice until it was happening. You talked in a way that felt rare, easy, like you'd already earned some kind of shorthand with each other, and afterwards you replayed it. You went home and thought, where has this person been? Here's the thing I want to say first before we go anywhere else. That feeling is real. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was an illusion, or that you made it up, or that you should have known better. That feeling of instant ease with another person, that's not nothing. It deserves to be taken seriously, but there's a question worth sitting with. What exactly were you recognizing? Because recognition is a fascinating word. It means you've seen something before, and sometimes what we recognize in another person is their warmth, their humor, their particular way of seeing the world. That's genuine connection. But sometimes, and this is worth being honest about, what we recognize is a feeling, a pattern, a relational texture that our nervous system knows intimately, even if our conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. That pull you feel toward this avoidant person, I'm not asking you to dismiss it. I'm asking you to get curious about it. Because the two possibilities, this is someone I can genuinely build with, and this feels electric because it rhymes with something old and painful. Those two possibilities can look identical from the inside. So that's what we're going to figure out together. Here's a simple example that has nothing to do with romance. Imagine you grew up in a house where dinner conversation was unpredictable. Some nights everyone was warm and laughing. Other nights someone was withdrawn or tense, and you'd spend the meal trying to read the room, adjusting yourself, staying careful, waiting for the temperature to change. You became very, very good at that kind of monitoring. Now, decades later, you walk into a work environment where your manager runs hot and cold. Some days they praise you, some days they're distant, and you have no idea why. Your colleagues find it exhausting and confusing, but you know exactly how to operate in that space, not because it's healthy, but because you have years of practice. Familiarity doesn't feel like comfort exactly. It feels like competence, like I know how to do this. And that sense of competence in a relational dynamic can create a pull that genuinely resembles attraction. Now let's contrast that with what healthy relational ease actually feels like. Healthy connection has a quality of settling, not flatness. People misunderstand this. It's not boring, it's more like the difference between standing on sand that shifts under your feet versus standing on solid ground. You can still dance on solid ground. You can still feel excitement, chemistry, depth. But your nervous system isn't working overtime to maintain your footing. Trauma familiarity tends to feel like activation. Healthy connection tends to feel like arrival. These can overlap. They can coexist in the same relationship at different times. But when you notice that your primary emotional experience with someone is a kind of low-grade vigilance, watching for their mood, wondering what version of them you'll get today, feeling a surge of relief when they're close, and a spike of anxiety when they pull back, that's worth paying attention to, not as condemnation, just as information. Let's talk about the anxious-avoidant dynamic directly, without making either person the villain. People who tend toward anxious attachment, and this can shift across different relationships and different periods of life, have often learned that emotional closeness requires maintenance, that if you don't stay attentive, don't stay appealing, don't manage the relationship carefully enough, connection can disappear, so they lean in, they pursue, they ask questions about the relationship, they reach for reassurance. People who tend toward avoidant attachment have often learned a different lesson, that emotional closeness is the thing that gets complicated. That need, in themselves and in others, tends to lead somewhere uncomfortable, so they pull back, not always consciously. Often it's more like a low-grade pressure that builds when intimacy reaches a certain depth, and they find themselves needing space without always being able to explain why. Now put these two people together. When the avoidant pulls back, the anxious person's alert system activates. What did I do? Is something wrong? Are we okay? And they reach forward, which is entirely natural, but from the avoidant person's perspective, that reaching confirms the pressure they were already feeling, so they pull back more, which increases the anxious person's alarm, which increases the reaching. Neither person is doing something wrong in the shallow sense. They're both responding to their own internal logic, but together they're creating a loop that makes both of them feel worse over time, even as the intensity between them stays high. Here's the part nobody talks about enough. This cycle isn't a sign that two people are incompatible. It's a sign that two people are bringing their unresolved relational fears into contact with each other. And that can be worked with by both people, separately or together, but only if both people are willing to look at it honestly. The cycle only stops when at least one person steps out of their automatic response. There's a reason people describe this dynamic as addictive, and it's worth understanding clearly, not to make you feel like a victim of your own nervous system, but to help you see what you're actually dealing with. When something we want is available only sometimes, our attention becomes disproportionately focused on it. This is a well-documented pattern in how humans and animals respond to unpredictable rewards. Researchers have studied this across all kinds of contexts, not just relationships. The inconsistency doesn't reduce desire, it intensifies it. So when your avoidant partner is warm and present and wonderful, it registers with unusual force. Because you've been waiting. Because it was uncertain. That warmth hits differently than it would if it had been consistent and available all along. And here's the emotional consequence of that. You start to organize your inner life around those moments. The good ones. The ones that felt like the relationship you wanted. And you begin to believe, on some level, that if you can just find the right key, you can make the good version the permanent version. That belief is what keeps people in this cycle long past the point where they would otherwise have left. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's a very human response to intermittent connection, a kind of hope that wears the face of love. But here's a question worth sitting with. Are you in love with this person, or are you in love with who they are when they're not scared? Because sometimes we fall in love with someone's potential, the version of them that shows up briefly and then retreats, and we mistake the pursuit of that version for intimacy, when what it actually is waiting. 2 scenes worth watching scene. A. It's a Tuesday evening. You and this person had a genuinely wonderful weekend, maybe the best you've had in months. Real conversation, physical closeness, a few moments where it felt like all the friction between you had dissolved. Then Monday passes quietly. Tuesday, you send a message. Something light. A funny thing you saw. A question about their week. You watch. The phone. The little notification that tells you they've read it appears. No response. An hour goes by. 2 hours. By evening, you've drafted and deleted 4 follow-up messages. You've scrolled back through the weekend trying to find the moment something went wrong. You're running a quiet internal investigation into what you might have said, what you might have done, whether you were too much or not enough. Meanwhile, and this is important to understand, the avoidant person is sitting with their own version of the weekend. Part of them loved it too. But something in the closeness activated a kind of internal alarm. This is a lot. I need to come up for air. They're not punishing you. They're not indifferent. They're genuinely overwhelmed by intimacy in a way they may not even have the vocabulary to articulate yet, so they go quiet. The tragedy is that both people are suffering, and both people believe the other person holds the solution. Scene B, same situation, same wonderful weekend, same sudden silence. But this time, something different happens inside you. You notice the anxiety rising, that familiar tightening, the compulsive checking, and instead of immediately acting on it, You pause. Not because you've suppressed the feeling, but because you've gotten better at recognizing what the feeling is actually asking for. I feel disconnected. I feel uncertain. I want reassurance. And rather than reaching toward a person who isn't currently available to give it, you do something concrete. You call a friend, you go for a walk, you write a few sentences in a journal, not to analyze the relationship, but just to let the feeling move through you without taking over. You send one message, something genuine but not loaded. Hey, hope you're having a decent week. And then you put the phone down and get on with your life. Not as a tactic, not to seem unavailable, but because you've started to understand that your inner steadiness cannot, should not, depend entirely on this one person's response time. That's not detachment. That's self-respect in practice. What you can actually do this week. Let's get practical. Not in a listicle way, just genuinely useful. First, work with your nervous system, not against it. When the anxiety of this dynamic spikes, when you're waiting for a text, when they've gone quiet, when you feel that specific restless urgency, your body is in an activated state, and making decisions, sending messages, having important conversations while you're in that state tends to go badly. A few things that actually help in the moment. Slow, extended exhales. Breathing out for longer than you breathe in. Try a 4-count inhale and a 6 or 8-count exhale is one of the simplest ways to signal safety to your nervous system. It sounds almost too basic. Do it anyway. Do it for 2 minutes. Orienting. Slowly look around the room you're in and name 5 things you can see, not as a distraction technique, as a way of returning your attention to where you actually are right now, which is not in the relationship crisis your brain is currently constructing. Physical movement. A 10-minute walk, ideally outside. Not to think through the relationship, just to move. Your nervous system responds to movement as a signal that you're handling things. These aren't cures, they're de-escalators. The point is to create enough of a gap between the feeling and the action that you have some choice in what you do next. Second, scripts that help and the ones to avoid. What not to say when you're in the anxious spiral and they've gone quiet. Are we okay? This almost always increases pressure on an avoidant person, even if it's completely legitimate to want to know. I feel like you always do this. The word always triggers defensiveness and shuts down conversation. Never mind. Forget I said anything. This seems like backing off, but it often communicates passive distress, which also increases pressure. What tends to work better? I've noticed I felt a bit uncertain between us this week. When you have some bandwidth, I'd like to check in. No urgency. This is clear, it's non-accusatory, it gives them agency over timing, and it doesn't perform anxiety at them. Or sometimes the most dignified thing is to say nothing, and instead give yourself the honest acknowledgement internally. I want closeness right now and it's not available. That's hard. I can sit with hard. Third, notice when you're performing. Performing for love looks like saying what you think they want to hear rather than what's true for you. Minimizing your needs so they don't feel burdened. Being relentlessly low maintenance to seem like the easy option. Laughing off things that actually bothered you. Showing up as the version of yourself you think they're most likely to want to keep. This is exhausting. And the painful irony is that it doesn't build the closeness you're hoping for, because the person who's staying is staying for a performance, not for you. The antidote isn't to suddenly become demanding, it's to practice small acts of honesty in low-stakes moments. Say you'd prefer Thai food over Italian when they ask. Mention that a comment they made last week landed a bit oddly. Let them see you have a bad day without immediately trying to manage their reaction to it. Consistency in small truths builds more real connection than any amount of strategic self-presentation. Being missed versus being chosen. This is a distinction that I think changes things for people when it really lands, so I want to take it slowly. There is a particular kind of feeling that happens when someone who's been distant comes back. When the person who went quiet suddenly reaches out. when the avoidant partner has a warm, available evening with you after a long stretch of distance. There's a rush in that moment that can feel like confirmation. See, they do care. See, this is real. And they might care. It might be real. But being missed and being chosen consistently are not the same thing. Being missed means you occupy space in someone's inner world when you're not there, when the distance has created enough absence that they feel it. That's real, but it's also contingent. It depends on the gap. Fill the gap completely and the feeling often retreats. Being chosen consistently means someone shows up for you not when absence has made them feel it, but as a practice. As a decision they renew, in the ordinary Tuesdays, in the moments when it's inconvenient, in the times when they're a little stressed or tired, and they still make space for you. One of these feels more intense, the other is what actually builds a life. And I want to be honest with you, intensity is not a character flaw. It's not something to be ashamed of that you find this dynamic electric, but intensity is a feeling, and what you're deciding is whether you want to build around a feeling or around a person. Feelings fluctuate. People, the right ones over time, can show up. What this avoidant would need to actually change. I want to be straightforward here, because I think a lot of content about this topic either lets avoidant people entirely off the hook or demonizes them. Neither is useful. If an avoidant person is going to show up differently in a relationship, a few things have to be true. They have to want to, not as a way of keeping someone around, not as a response to ultimatums, but because they've looked at their own patterns and recognized that what they've been doing, pulling back from intimacy at the moment it deepens, isn't actually serving them either. Avoidant patterns often come with their own loneliness, their own grief at connections that never quite reach the depth they wanted. They have to develop some capacity for tolerating emotional closeness without immediately seeking an exit. This isn't a switch. It's incremental. It might involve their own therapy, their own reflective work, their own honest conversations with people they trust. But it requires active engagement, not passive good intentions. And critically, they have to be willing to communicate when they're feeling overwhelmed rather than simply disappearing. That one shift, I'm feeling a bit flooded, I need a couple of days to myself instead of just going silent, changes the entire relational experience for the anxious partner. Because silence reads as rejection, context reads as honesty. You cannot do this work for them. You can name what you need, you can create conditions that might make it easier, but you cannot want their growth more than they do. And if you find yourself waiting years for someone to decide they want to change, that's a decision in itself, a slow one, made by inertia rather than choice. I want to address something directly because it comes up a lot. When people start to hear the case for choosing stability and security over intensity and chase, something in them resists. They hear security and they picture something dull, a relationship that's comfortable but not alive, a person who's kind but who doesn't make them feel anything. That's not what I'm describing. Security in a relationship doesn't mean an absence of feeling. It means the ground is solid enough that both people can actually be present. Secure relationships can have depth, passion, genuine tension, rich conversation, real desire. What they don't have is the particular anxiety of wondering whether you're loved. That anxiety doesn't make a relationship more meaningful. It crowds out meaning. It's hard to be genuinely present with someone when part of your attention is perpetually monitoring whether they're still there. When people get a taste of relational security, often for the first time, they sometimes describe it as surprisingly emotional, because all that energy that was going toward managing the relationship is suddenly free for the relationship itself. And here's another thing. This person is kind and available doesn't mean settling. It means you've stopped requiring suffering as proof of love. That's not resignation. That's growth. Here's where I want to leave you. At some point in this kind of dynamic, there's a decision that has nothing to do with the other person. It doesn't depend on whether they change, whether they reach out, whether they finally see what they had with you. It's a decision you make about yourself. It sounds something like this. I am no longer available to be the person who waits. not with bitterness, not as a performance of moving on, just as a quiet internal reorientation, what that looks like practically. You stop making yourself small in the hope they'll stay. You stop interpreting their withdrawal as something you need to fix. You stop organizing your emotional life around a relationship that's only available to you part of the time, and you start to slowly, imperfectly asking yourself different questions. Not how do I make them want to stay, but what do I actually want this relationship to feel like? Not what's wrong with me that they keep pulling back, but what do I need in order to feel genuinely safe with someone? These questions tend to take you somewhere, and sometimes where they take you is back to this relationship with new clarity. A clarity that either finds the avoidant person ready to meet you differently, or helps you see honestly that they're not. Either outcome is a better outcome than the loop. The chemistry you felt at the beginning, I believe it was real. I'm not asking you to discount it or feel foolish about it. I'm asking you to expand your definition of what a good relationship can feel like. Because chemistry without consistency is just weather. Beautiful some days, brutal others, and not something you can build a home inside. What you're actually looking for, what I think you've always been looking for, is someone you can both want and trust at the same time. That exists, and it starts with you deciding you won't accept anything less.